I never expected the same child I once rocked to sleep to become the architect of my fear. It began with an ordinary phone call, Thanksgiving plans, menu choices, and polite small talk. But when he forgot to hang up, I heard words that froze my blood. He and his wife laughed about our age, our trust, and our savings, mapping out a plan that twisted love into leverage. They thought we were naive. They thought age made us weak. But the moment that call continued, our innocence ended, and their mistake began. My name is Beatrice Langford. I'm 66, and I never imagined fear would come not from strangers, but from the very child I once trusted with my whole heart. It began as an ordinary call, my son asking about Thanksgiving plans, reminiscing about old family traditions, and pretending kindness. When the conversation ended, I set the phone down, but it didn't disconnect. That's when I heard his voice twist into something cold, discussing us like prey. The words kidnap and easy targets clung to me like ice. In that moment, innocence fractured. Age didn't make me naive. Love did, and fear settled in a place I never thought it could. Frozen in place, she listened as the whispers grew sharper. Her son outlined timing, transportation, and access points, while his wife mocked their routine, how predictable they were, how trusting. They planned to use Thanksgiving dinner as bait, believing older people were easier to subdue. She heard laughter, the excitement of greed disguised as strategy. They spoke about money, insurance, and property, treating it like a jackpot. The casualness was more terrifying than the plan itself. Their voices carried no hesitation, no remorse. She covered her mouth to stop a gasp, realizing this wasn't a joke. It was intent, and she had heard enough to fear for her life. When her husband entered the room, he saw the pallor in her face before she uttered a word. She explained what she heard, the phrases replaying like echoes she couldn't silence. His disbelief shifted into horror as the details unfolded. They sat together, hearts pounding, trying to reconcile the sweet child they raised with the calculated voice they overheard. Shock turned into numbness, betrayal into clarity. He held her hands, steadying both their trembling. There were no tears, just a quiet, crushing understanding. Pretending ignorance would be fatal, confronting them would be foolish. They needed proof, they needed protection. And they needed it fast. Her hands trembled, dialing the number, but her voice didn't. The investigator listened patiently as she recounted the conversation. Unlike friends or relatives who might dismiss or doubt, he didn't flinch. He asked precise questions, dates, locations, behaviors, and explained what he could legally record. He didn't promise comfort, he promised evidence. He advised discretion and secrecy, warning that confronting their son would only drive the plan underground. She realized this wasn't paranoia, it was survival. Hiring him felt like crossing a threshold from denial to action. Betrayal still stung, but fear now had structure, direction, and a professional ally. Over the next few days, she gathered documents, insurance papers, bank statements, property deeds, realizing how thoroughly they had underestimated her. She copied everything discreetly, storing duplicates outside the home. She compiled notes on conversations, behaviors, and past comments she had once brushed off as thoughtlessness. Each detail became a thread in a pattern she could no longer ignore. It was heartbreaking to prepare files against her own child, but heartbreak wasn't as heavy as the alternative, ignorance. She understood that if their plan depended on assets, she needed to secure them. Fear didn't paralyze her, it mobilized her. She and her husband installed new locks, reinforced doors, and upgraded alarms, measures they once thought unnecessary. The investigator helped set up discrete cameras around entries and common areas. They tested panic buttons, memorized emergency procedures, and developed signals in case things escalated. It felt surreal, preparing their home against the very person who once played in its yard. The walls held memories of birthdays, holidays, scraped knees, and lullabies. Now they prepared for a very different kind of visit. Fear changed the house, but so did determination. They wouldn't be helpless victims. When the phone rang again, she forced her voice steady, pretending nothing was wrong. He spoke cheerfully about recipes and arrival times, his tone dripping with false warmth. She matched it, responding with practiced calm, while her husband silently listened. Every word felt like walking on a tightrope. One slip could expose suspicion. She smiled through the conversation, masking dread beneath pleasantries. He had no idea she knew, and that ignorance was their only advantage. They ended the call politely, and she exhaled, realizing the performance had just begun. Thanksgiving wouldn't be a celebration. It would be a battlefield, one they planned to control. They arrived with rehearsed smiles and gift bags, acting like the dutiful children they hadn't been in years. Damien hugged his father with exaggerated enthusiasm, and Lydia handed over flowers, her eyes scanning the house subtly. Their car engine hadn't cooled before the atmosphere shifted, fake warmth layered over predatory intent. She watched every movement, noticing how they exchanged brief glances, silently confirming what parts of the home to observe. Their overly cheerful greetings didn't mask the tension beneath. The investigator, already positioned nearby, observed from a distance, documenting their behavior. The couple believed they were stepping into an easy setup. They didn't realize they were walking into one. Their affection was suddenly suffocating. Lydia complimented the curtains she previously mocked. Damien praised meals he once called bland. They laughed too loudly, spoke too sweetly, and acted too interested in memories they had long dismissed. It was theater, not love. Every sentimental word felt calculated, disarming tactics meant to reassure their victims. She responded with polite nods and small smiles, playing her own part convincingly. Her husband matched her restraint, silently watching for slips. Underneath the staged adoration, greed glimmered. Their false tenderness was more telling than hostility could ever be. Her husband held himself with dignified calm, even as dread churned beneath his composure. He poured drinks, discussed harmless topics, and kept conversation flowing. His steady demeanor concealed the fear lodged in his chest, but he refused to give their son a hint of suspicion. He mirrored their politeness, though his eyes were sharper than his tone. He made excuses to step away, quietly texting the investigator updates. His restraint was not weakness, it was strategy. The man who once taught his son integrity now had to weaponize calmness to survive deceit. It was a painful contradiction, but a necessary one. Earlier that day, the investigator installed discreet cameras in key locations: living room corners, hallway shelves, even disguised within Dacre. Microphones were placed near the dining table, ready to capture incriminating conversations. The equipment blended seamlessly, invisible to anyone untrained. As the evening unfolded, the investigator monitored remotely, watching Damien and Lydia's movements closely. Every sidelong glance, every whispered comment, every attempt to search rooms became evidence. Technology replaced trust. The home, once a shelter of unconditional love, now served as a carefully staged trap, not out of malice but out of necessity. At one point, when she excused herself to check the oven, Damien's demeanor shifted. He wandered casually toward the study, pretending curiosity about old photo albums. Instead, he opened drawers, checked shelves, scanned for safes or files. His movements were hurried yet practiced, like someone who had rehearsed exactly where wealth should be stored. The investigator captured every second. When Harold returned unexpectedly, Damien feigned nostalgia, holding an old photo. But the guilt flashed in his eyes. For a moment, the mask slipped, revealing desperation, not need, but greed. Lydia's phone vibrated, and she glanced at it with a flicker of excitement, not concerned. The message preview revealed just enough: arrive when sign given. Her pulse quickened, and she stepped away under the pretext of taking a call. The investigator zoomed in through the camera's lens, capturing the moment. She whispered instructions, confirming timing and location. Her voice was low, but confidence made it clear. This wasn't hesitation. This was commitment. When she returned to the table, she resumed her sugary facade, but her eyes betrayed anticipation. The trap they believed they were setting was moments from collapsing onto them. The investigator documented every detail: screenshots of texts, audio recordings of whispers, video footage of suspicious movements. Layer by layer, the case built itself. This wasn't speculative, it was concrete. He contacted law enforcement discreetly, confirming readiness for intervention. The evidence was no longer just overheard words, it was visible intent, documented action. She and her husband exchanged subtle nods, knowing the turning point was approaching. They weren't powerless. They weren't alone. And Thanksgiving dinner, once a symbol of family unity, had become the stage where truth would finally surface. Before the guests arrived, the investigator met with law enforcement in a quiet parking lot nearby. He presented the recordings, text messages, and surveillance evidence collected over the last 48 hours. The officers didn't treat it like a family dispute. They treated it like a criminal conspiracy. They developed a plan. Plainclothes officers would wait outside until they received a signal, while another team remained on standby in case of accomplices. The couple rehearsed their own roles, feigning hospitality. Fear gnawed at them, but control required composure. Thanksgiving wouldn't be stopped, it would be used as proof. The table was set, the trap was set, and the law stood ready. The dinner unfolded with practiced normalcy: silverware clinking, turkey carved, and polite conversation circling meaningless topics. Lydia admired the centerpiece, Damien complimented the seasoning. They played their parts well, masking sinister intentions beneath tradition. But beneath the tablecloth, her husband's leg trembled slightly. She hid her shaking hands beneath napkins. The investigator watched discreetly through a feed, noting every suspicious exchange. They were waiting, not for the meal to end, but for the moment intent became action. The atmosphere was thick, like a theater performance where only half the audience knew the script. The illusion of family lingered, but only barely. The shift was subtle. Lydia reached for a bottle of wine, pretending to refill glasses, but instead of pouring, she palmed a small vial from her sleeve. its contents clear enough to dissolve unnoticed. Her fingers hovered over the glass meant for the elderly couple. Her expression never faltered, her smile remained soft and benign. It was the ordinary gesture that concealed extraordinary malice. She whispered something to Damien under her breath, timing perhaps. The investigator captured it all. That single movement was the transition from planning to committing. It was no longer hypothetical. It was attempted harm. The investigator didn't wait for the substance to touch the glass. He sent the signal, 2 quick taps on his earpiece, and officers mobilized. Within seconds, unmarked vehicles rolled silently toward the house. Plainclothes officers positioned at exits, blocking escape routes. The investigator stepped away from the monitor and prepared to enter with them. The couple inside remained unaware, still performing hospitality. Timing was everything. The goal was not just to stop the act, but to catch it in progress. The officers understood. This wasn't a family feud, it was an active threat. And now, intervention had legal grounding. The door burst open, startling silverware and voices alike. Officers entered with calm authority, not chaos, announcing the arrest. Lydia's hand froze, the vial clattering against the wine glass. Damien's face drained of color as recognition struck, not of guilt, but of consequences. Their confidence shattered instantly. The parents didn't scream or accuse, they simply watched. The officers secured both suspects, reading rights clearly. Chairs scraped, turkey grew cold, and Thanksgiving transformed into evidence. The betrayal wasn't theoretical anymore. It sat at the table, interrupted before it could consume. As officers escorted them toward waiting cars, Lydia snapped. She tried to justify the plan, claiming financial desperation, inheritance, and entitlement. Damien followed, insisting they deserved the assets. The microphones captured every word, tone, phrasing, and intent. What had been circumstantial now became solid. Conspiracy, premeditation, and attempted harm. Officers exchanged glances, their case had just strengthened itself. The investigator didn't need to pressure them. Their panic did the talking. The truth spilled out, not coerced, but voluntary. Betrayal had finally confessed itself. Relatives who had arrived later for dessert stood frozen on the porch, watching officers lead the couple away. Confusion became horror as details emerged. They looked at the elderly parents with sympathy and disbelief, struggling to reconcile the loving son they remembered with the criminal standing handcuffed. Whispers turned into tears, holidays turned into a courtroom preview. The betrayal was no longer private pain, it was public reality. And in that moment, family bonds were tested, not by loyalty, but by truth. At the police station, Damien and Lydia sat in separate interrogation rooms, the arrogance they carried into Thanksgiving stripped away. Investigators laid out the evidence: audio recordings, text messages, surveillance footage, and the vial recovered from the table. Their attorney arrived, expecting a misunderstanding, but quickly realized the gravity of the charges: conspiracy to commit kidnapping, attempted poisoning, and financial fraud. There was no room for negotiation. The judge denied bail, citing premeditation and risk to the victims. For the first time, Damien understood the difference between entitlement and criminality. The law wasn't punishing a mistake, it was responding to intent. As the case unfolded, investigators uncovered emails, browser history, and drafts of documents indicating the couple had researched property transfers, inheritance loopholes, and life insurance policies. The motive became undeniable. They targeted retirement savings, home equity, and insurance benefits. Prosecutors argued that this wasn't desperation, it was greed. Their meticulous planning revealed they weren't acting under impulse. They believed the victims, age made them easy targets. The narrative shifted from family tragedy to calculated financial crime. Their names, once associated with success and ambition, now headlined tabloids as symbols of betrayal driven by wealth. The motive became the most damning evidence of all. Their attorney, an experienced estate lawyer, moved swiftly to protect assets from potential manipulation or fraudulent access. He filed motions to freeze any joint accounts Damien might attempt to exploit, secured title protection on the house, and coordinated with banks to monitor suspicious transactions. He also advised them to update beneficiaries and passwords immediately. The legal process was exhausting but necessary. They realized how vulnerable they had been, not because of age, but because of trust. With each protection put in place, the fear eased slightly. Their focus shifted from survival to safeguarding, ensuring no loophole could ever be used against them again. In a quiet office lit by afternoon sunlight, they rewrote their will under the guidance of their attorney. Gone were the assumptions that family equaled loyalty. Instead, clear stipulations were added: disinheritance for anyone convicted of crimes against them, assets directed to charities, trustworthy relatives, and community programs. Conditional clauses ensured that manipulation or coercion could not influence distribution. For the first time, there were reflected reality, not sentiment. It was heartbreaking to formalize such measures against their own child, yet it brought a strange peace. They weren't punished out of anger. They were protecting their legacy from betrayal. When the extended family learned the full truth, reactions splintered. Some blamed the couple, insisting parents must have provoked or misunderstood. Others were horrified, rallying behind them with support and apologies. Arguments erupted at gatherings, and long-standing relationships fractured as relatives struggled to reconcile affection for Damien with his actions. The couple didn't engage. They were too exhausted to defend themselves or justify their decisions. The situation exposed uncomfortable truths. Loyalty without morality is blind. Those who sided with Damien revealed their own priorities. Those who stood with the victims showed empathy. The fracture hurt, but clarity helped. Though they survived the physical threat, stress took its toll. One night, as he tried to sleep, Harold felt tightness in his chest and numbness in his arm. She rushed him to the hospital, where doctors confirmed hypertensive complications triggered by emotional trauma. The betrayal hadn't just endangered their safety, it affected their health. He lay in a hospital bed, exhausted, confronting the reality that the son he once cradled now jeopardized his life. The irony stung deeply. She held his hand, understanding that physical wounds heal faster than emotional ones. The attack had been stopped, but its consequences lingered. News traveled quickly, first whispered across fences, then shared in community meetings and local news reports. Neighbors who once waved at Damien were now stunned by the charges. Outrage spread, not merely at the attempted crime, but at the exploitation of trust. They had admired the family as pillars of the neighborhood, never suspecting such malice. Some organized support, delivering meals and offering companionship. Others expressed disbelief, questioning how anyone could betray parents for money. The community reshaped its perception, seeing the couple not as paranoid elders, but as survivors of a calculated threat. Sympathy replaced doubt. Outrage replaced gossip. Because after the arrests, we learned safety isn't won in a moment. It's defended, like I'm asking you to subscribe. The last twist was still coming. The courtroom was silent as the judge read the verdict. Damien and Lydia were found guilty on all primary charges: conspiracy to kidnap, attempted poisoning, and financial exploitation of vulnerable adults. Their attorney attempted to argue for leniency, citing emotional strain and financial pressure, but the judge dismissed it. Their plan was calculated, not impulsive. The seriousness of the crime outweighed any excuses. Bail was denied due to risk of retaliation and flight. As officers escorted them out, their confidence evaporated, replaced by panic. Meanwhile, the elderly couple remained composed. Justice hadn't brought joy, but it brought safety, and that mattered more than satisfaction. Following sentencing, the court issued additional protective directives. Damien and Lydia were barred from representing the couple in any legal capacity, forbidden from accessing medical records, and stripped of visitation rights. The restraining order expanded beyond physical contact to include digital communication. No letters, no calls, no proxy messages through relatives. For years, they had assumed power over their parents' decisions because of blood ties. Now, that power was severed by law. The couple no longer had to fear manipulation disguised as family concern. Legal distance replaced emotional obligation, giving them breathing room they never realized they needed. Authorities enrolled them in a senior protection initiative designed for victims of familial targeting. They received home security evaluations, access to emergency response technology, and legal support for long-term safety planning. Their address and personal information were shielded within government databases. Meetings with counselors helped them navigate the psychological aftermath, understanding that betrayal by a child is trauma, not shame. The program didn't erase fear, but it gave structure to cope with it. For the first time since the call, they slept through the night without jolting awake at imagined footsteps. Safety felt real, not fragile. With their son legally disqualified, they appointed their niece, someone who demonstrated loyalty rather than expectation, as the executor. She didn't lobby for the role, she simply showed compassion when it mattered. A portion of assets was redirected to charity programs supporting elder safety and legal aid for vulnerable adults. It wasn't done out of revenge, but purpose. If their suffering could prevent another family's betrayal, then their story would carry meaning beyond pain. Legacy shifted from wealth inheritance to moral inheritance, rewarding integrity and punishing entitlement with silence, not spectacle. From prison, Damien attempted an appeal, claiming emotional manipulation by his wife and lack of criminal intent. However, the appellate court reviewed evidence, recordings, surveillance, and explicit planning, and dismissed the argument unanimously. His lawyer warned him that continuing appeals would only prolong sentencing. He began to realize that his decisions didn't just cost him freedom, They cost him family, trust, and any claim to moral justification. Regret surfaced, but it was too late. The legal system didn't measure remorse by timing, it measured it by truth. And the truth was already proven. As months passed, neighbors, church members, and local organizations came to understand the depth of the ordeal. They stopped viewing the couple as fragile elders and began seeing them as resilient survivors. Invitations came not out of pity, but respect. Community centers asked them to speak about elder exploitation prevention. Their voices carried weight, not because they sought attention, but because they lived through a threat most people never imagine. They gained new connections built not on obligation but admiration. They weren't defined by what almost happened. They were defined by how they responded. With strength, clarity, and courage in the end, healing didn't come from forgiveness or reconciliation. It came from boundaries, firm, legal, and emotional. They accepted that parents can love a child without allowing access. They acknowledged grief but didn't let it rule them. They moved forward with routines, gardening, volunteering, and spending time with people who valued them. Thanksgiving eventually returned, not as a haunted memory, but as a reclaimed tradition shared with those who respected their home and safety. They didn't rebuild the family through blood. They rebuilt it through trust. And peace, real peace, arrived not when they forgot the betrayal, but when they stopped letting it define them.